Avian influenza is a type A influenza virus. Type A viruses are often associated with seasonal flu outbreaks and evolve most rapidly and are most likely to cause large-scale outbreaks in susceptible populations. This most recent outbreak was first detected in the Americas in late 2021 and 2022. It is caused by the highly pathogenic H5N1 virus subtype. Joining us this morning to share more is Dr. Paul Crooks, President of the Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Association. Good morning, Dr. Crooks, and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you with us on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Excellent. I'm doing well, thank you. And quite interested in this conversation because one of the things that we just saw from that is that this is not something that is perhaps prevalent at this point in time. So why are we discussing avian influenza?
Well, avian influenza can have multiple impacts across the board. We are talking the possibility here of really negative impact on our poultry industry. I think the major concern for persons, yes, there is the potential for a zoonotic disease transfer where an animal that is sick may make a person sick. But really what we're looking at is the possibility of the poultry industry being massively devastated. So I have to go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I have to say we have the Ministry of Agriculture, the Tobago House of Assembly Division of Food Security, we have the University of the West Indies, and we have key players there like Dr. Shane Ramzubeek and the chief vet, Dr. Lanagan, who have been taking very active measures to prepare in case Trinidad and Tobago does eventually get exposed to bird flu and how we manage that.
Now, Dr. Crooks, one of the things that you mentioned was the impact on the poultry industry. Would you say that that would be one of the deepest impacts, or are there more things that would be adversely affected by an avian influenza outbreak?
So the first thing that we may see is if a country already has bird flu or an area or region already has bird flu, it may affect our poultry imports. Of course, Trinidad and Tobago is still a net importer of many of our goods and many of the things that we eat. And so if we already have an impact on net imports, well, of course, we have an impact on our food supply or food chain. But moreover, for the poultry industry in particular, we may import hatching eggs, which are eggs that carry live chicks. We may also import live birds for growing up, either into laying birds or broiler birds, which are used for meat. So we have these two segments, the broiler and laying industries, that may be negatively impacted because we have the source affected with bird flu. So we can't import. We don't want to take that risk. Moreover, if the birds come here and the birds have bird flu, or as what we've seen in general is wild waterfowl, so we're talking geese and ducks and so on, seagulls flying from country to country, carrying the bird flu virus and affect our domestic population, then we're going to have excessively high mortality. And where we had, let's say, 1 million birds being produced per month, we're now down to 500,000 birds being produced per month, or even less. And then when you talk about the containment of the outbreak, we are talking about destruction, humane destruction of the affected birds so that the disease isn't spread. We're talking about control measures for traffic and for persons on foot moving from place to place because we don't want this virus to spread. So the implications are vast. And then when we talk about influenza type A viruses, because they have the capacity to evolve as they do, the host range may change. So right now we know that we have had cattle affected in the US, we have had sea lions affected, we have had domestic cats affected by this virus. We've also seen that people become infected by the virus, generally high-risk people, and even dairy cows' milk have been shedding this virus. So there is the possibility that the virus may become more infective to human animals, and therefore there is that risk as well.
Now, Dr. Crooks, you just gave us a lot of information there. In fact, both Inka and I, when we heard sea lions, we were like, what? Now, Because the thing is, many times with this, the first thing that we think is waterfowl. That is what brings bird flu, basically, into a country. Is there any other way that bird flu can be introduced into a country?
Well, so we have the possibility, of course, of the wild waterfowl being the natural host that brings the virus. But of course, any imported live bird, because birds are the natural host, may bring it. But because we've also seen that mammalian species are infected, there is the possibility, although remote, that a mammalian animal may be infected and introduce the virus. We, like right now, there is no evidence of human to human transmission with this virus, while we have had a few persons affected. And in general, the people who may be affected by this virus are going to be persons who are at high risk. So we're talking immunocompromised individuals, children, the elderly, people who have other viral diseases, maybe diseases like HIV, those persons, or infections like HIV, I should say, those persons may be or are at higher risk of becoming sick. However, if the virus evolves, then you may have more and more people affected, and we may see the possibility of mammal to mammal transmission, in particular human to human transmission. So as it stands right now, it's generally going to be that we're monitoring the importation of live birds, and if possible, that we can start some surveillance on wild waterfowl to see if they are sick or carrying the virus.
Understood. Now, we definitely need to get to that conversation of what's being put in place to monitor, as you would have mentioned. But before we get to that, something that we hear many people speak about just in passing, and with different forwards and that sort of thing on social media, is the relationship between the avian flu and food contamination. What is the relationship? Is this opinion valid that you can get it from, let's say, eating eggs or something like that?
Thank you very much for that question, because that is one of the points I want to ensure I get across to the members of the public. The consumption of poultry and poultry products, it is entirely safe. There is no risk. The risk comes to the person who is interacting with the live bird, or even perhaps interacting with the dead bird. So what we are advising members of the public to do, whatever field you may work in, even if you are working with poultry every day, if you see excessive deaths of wild birds or of your own flock, please be careful. Call a veterinarian, whether it be just the veterinarian that you have a client-patient relationship with, or it's a government veterinarian through the Ministry of Agriculture or the Tobago House of Assembly, where you may observe excessive mortality. Let's say you normally have 2% of your birds dying every day, which may be a normal rate for you on your farm. You know what the normal is. If you now have 50% of your birds dying, 25% of your birds dying, it is worth investigating. At the very least, call a veterinarian. If you see wild birds dying, you're out surfing, you're playing on the beach, it's the summer holidays, you see wild seagulls, pelicans dead on shore, do not handle them, because the possibility is that you may become infected in doing that. That is a high-risk behavior. And for persons who must handle dead birds or interact in a risky situation, you must take effective precautions and use personal protective equipment.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Definitely not your average conversation this morning when it comes to what you need to do to prevent. But one would think that once you start to see a high percentage of animals within the area passing away or dying, that you definitely need to take stock and pay keen attention. Now, let's get to prevention, something that is so important. I know that we can do our part as individuals, but also you and your team and the state can do their part as well. What would you say is the key to prevention of the avian influenza, Dr. Crooks?
All right, so that's an excellent question as well. You know that for many viral diseases, including the COVID-19 disease, we would have tried to find vaccines to prevent infection, because viral diseases are very difficult to treat, notoriously difficult to treat. While we have antibacterial drugs which work well for bacterial infections, working less well as we deal with antimicrobial resistance and so on, but still we have generally good, effective treatments. In the case of viruses, generally, we try to stimulate the immune response by using a vaccine. And we are all aware that there are seasonal flu vaccines which contain virus types to protect against many of the more common virus strains that we're exposed to. However, with bird flu and with influenza A viruses in general, because we see so much evolution of the virus, development of a vaccine is very, very, very difficult. And so our recommendation remains prevent exposure. Please keep yourself and your family safe. If you are dealing with poultry or live birds in any sense, please avoid handling dead animals. That remains the best way to prevent. The Ministry of Agriculture has your back because the ministry will pay attention to which regions and areas are affected with bird flu and which would pose a high risk for importation of the virus, of live animals with that virus, and therefore put in place temporary or even permanent bans on poultry from those areas. So the ministry has your back in that regard. Of course, that will negatively impact the industry, but at the same time, it's overall public health and the public good that the ministry is looking out for.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Now, on an individual level, of course, one of the things that you just discussed, which is critical, is not dealing with or limiting having to deal with dead animals specifically. Now, what about when it comes to protecting yourself? One of the things that first comes to mind is PPE. What needs to be covered? How are we supposed to dress ourselves so that if we do have no choice but to deal with this animal, we are protected?
Right. So in general, we are looking at a viral disease that is shed in every body secretion. So you deal with poultry, farmers will know what flu-like signs are. I'm sure every poultry farmer has had cause to call a vet for respiratory disease in poultry, even if it's not bird flu. And in most cases, it would not be bird flu. But you're going to see runny nose, weepy eyes. In live birds, you're going to see that they're sneezing, coughing. You'll hear the change in respiration as they are struggling to breathe in some cases. So we all know what flu-like signs look like. We've all had the cold or the flu, and those are the higher risk patients. We know as well that masking, even though masking is primarily to prevent spread from you to someone else, we know that masking does also reduce your own inhalation of virus particles. And in order to become sick, you have to have a combination of your immune system not working its best, maybe exposure to multiple pathogens, perhaps many millions of them at one point in time to overwhelm your immune response. And you also have to deal with perhaps you're stressed out and so on all at once for you to get sick. And so now where you're dealing with this poultry, if you can reduce in any way your exposure or inhalation of the virus through the secretions, whether it's the feces of the birds or the mucoid discharges from the nose or the eyes, that's the precaution you should take. So you're looking at gloves and mask bare minimum. And again, depending on the situation, you may take even more precautions. If you are highly suspicious it is bird flu already, you may want to wear disposable coveralls, disposable boots, and put these on and toss them when you're finished. So these are the types of steps that we expect people to take to limit their risk in exposure to bird flu.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Crooks, any closing comments this morning for us?
Well, we at the Trinidad and Tobago Vet Association really want to ensure that we have the public good in mind. We want to ensure that there's safe food, that our farming population is safe, and we, of course, want to ensure that people, whether or not they are members of the farming community, avoid risk. We know that there's the possibility of a pandemic, and it is a certainty that another pandemic will occur. We don't want that pandemic to be because of H5N1. And here in Trinidad and Tobago, we mishandled the birds that had it. And the reason that this virus was able to evolve. So let's try to protect ourselves, protect each other, and protect, on the whole, the public good, food safety, food security, by looking out for one another and avoiding bird flu.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Crooks, and thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Paul Crooks, president of the Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Association, speaking to us about avian influenza this morning. Stay tuned. After this break, you don't want to miss what's coming up.